Craig, why should we listen to this podcast today?
Startups are like marathons where the first 10 kilometers, everyone's all excited. Everything's going well. And then the middle part, it gets a little tougher. And then it gets exponentially tougher the closer you get to the finish line. And not everyone makes it to the finish line. And when you do get to the finish line, you're like, I'm never doing that again. And 5 minutes later, you're like, when's the next one? It's kind of like startups. Very, very similar. Everyone's always excited to start the startup.
Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Welcome to another episode of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. I am Candice Nanka, and today my co-host with me is Peggy. Hello, Peggy.
Hi, guys.
Peggy, maybe you can introduce our guest today, please.
All right. Craig Martin. Craig is a friend and an IT professional. He's been in the business for over 20 years in video game front-end database development. He's a co-founder, he tells me today, of 6 startup companies, amongst them Fairview Games, Skunkworks Software, Skunkworks Kinetic Industries, and iClinic. And I'm sure there'll be more. In fact, I think he has a new one on the horizon. I met Craig about 15 years ago when I did shred claims to the BDC, and he was a client of theirs, and I facilitated his shred claim. Since then, we've become friends, and actually, we did become business partner in a Bitcoin mining business, which is no longer, and we're not going to talk about that one today. That's a whole story in itself. Anyhow, today we're going to talk about startups in the software space, the challenges, the pitfalls of this ever-changing platform. Craig has been in it since the wild, wild west days, and so I'm going to turn it over to you, Craig, to tell me a bit more about yourself and the type of businesses you co-founded. Maybe tell us some of the challenges, some of the learnings. Where do you want to start?
First of all, thank you for having me on the show, and I appreciate the opportunity to pontificate, I guess, of the basically how to do a startup. And maybe we could start there, like literally just in the midst of doing a new one. And it sort of made me think of the processes and the steps when you're doing a startup. Like people might be asking, okay, well, I have this idea. I want to form a company. What do I do? Where do I start? And from there, it's like, okay, well then funding, how are you going to pay for things? So for this one, it's a good time for me to talk to you both about this. I would say step one, if we want to go through there, step one would be get yourself a corporate lawyer who knows the ins and outs of setting up the company.
Is it a lawyer that you want that has software startup experience, like things like IP ownership included in agreements, that kind of thing, or any corporate lawyer?
Typically, that's usually handled separately. The IP stuff is usually handled separately. That is a specialty of the lawyers. So typically, like my guy, he's a corporate lawyer where he ranges from like incorporation to mergers and acquisitions sort of things. But it was funny. I was just asking him about IP for the game company, and he had a couple of recommendations. So they are subspecialties.
So step one, corporate lawyer to get the corporation set up properly.
Correct. And then step two would be the accountant. And typically the lawyer and the accountant will work hand in hand just to get the articles of incorporation, to get everything set up, because then you go to the bank to open up your bank account. You can't open up your bank account until you have your certificate of incorporation to prove that actually you're an incorporated company.
Okay, that sounds like most corporations, the startup stage for most corporations. But good you went over it, Craig, because quite often we talk about it and nobody really defines what those steps are. And a lot of people put them in the wrong order. Right, Candice?
Yes, I do appreciate being contacted early on because there's nothing more frustrating for me and for the client when they come to me and say, oh, well, I set up this company and now I want to be able to give dividends to my spouse usually, but sometimes it's, a business partner, but I don't want dividends. And it's like, well, you didn't set it up that way. That's a major change that has to happen. So having your goals and objectives clear during that incorporation step is important. Not just your legal objectives, but your tax objectives, right?
Yeah. And typically the lawyer will ask you, well, how do you want to set it up? Like how many co-founders? How are we divvying up the initial pie before even getting into taking on investments and investors and things like that? It's more like, okay, how do you want to divvy it up? What's the share structure? Like how many different classes and things like that?
But what's not always clear to everybody is that there's three things that you're allocating when you're doing shares. There's votes, there's equity, and there's dividend. And sometimes you want different shares to deal with those things differently. So
Correct. Especially when it comes to voting and non-voting shares. That can be important. Sometimes life-saving.
Sometimes crippling.
Sometimes crippling. Yes. So, and then typically, because the reason why you want to bring the accountant in early, from my experience, is that they will ask you, okay, well, what's your year end? Pick your fiscal year end. And then you go, okay, so from there. And personally, I have my fiscal year ends of all my companies at the same time, end of September. So that allows me to get everything going through October, November before I have to do my personal in the new year.
good timing.
And it's good for your accountant too, right, Candace? That a fiscal year end that doesn't match everybody else's is kind of a good thing.
Universities seem to like March. So then I'm all organized on the corporate side by the time it gets to my personal side in the new year. And like I said, it just works for me. So our fiscal years is October 1st to September 30th.
30th, yeah. Okay, so once we've got the corp set up, we got the accounting set up, we got the corporate structure, we know how we're going to distribute shares. What happens next? Where do you get the money? How do you fund it? That's the interesting part of this business to me.
So yes, you have your corporation, you have your bank account. Yay. Okay, that's great. Now you can go a couple of different ways, right? You can go with friends and family. You can go, depending on what you're doing in your situation, you can start looking for grants. There's lots of grants out there. And then there is the VC route, venture capitalists, sorry. There's angel investors. There's a whole network in Vancouver, right, of angel investors.
I remember one time when you and I sat down and had coffee, and you had a real story around, I don't remember what the category of investment it was. Were they lending you money?
They were actually super helpful. Have you guys done a topic on shreds?
Yes.
In venture capitalists and angel.
Yes.
Have you, in that shred one, did you talk about how there's some companies out there, you have to be careful. The company I dealt with was really good, where they will lend you money against your future shred claims.
Yeah, it's a lot like factoring. We haven't talked about it on the podcast, but there is several companies, and they structure it so that if you have successful claims in the past, they will look at your future spend and forward you money on sort of almost like a factoring type of basis based on the anticipated shred that you're going to get. You have to have a track record. You have to have pretty good standing financially. I mean, not necessarily money in the bank and not necessarily huge cash flows, but they've got to believe that you have the money to pay the people to do the shred and that you have a successful shred history.
Yeah, and that's typically within that company. I'm sort of coming from the angle of someone's coming in, they're starting from zero, from scratch, right? Like that's how I do startups. So once you get established, I would say after a year or two, then that is, if you really need the money and you can't wait for the shred claim to go through and you're confident that the shred is going to go through, you can borrow against the shred. Was it expensive?
Yeah, it's usually like factoring prices. It's usually 2 or 3% a month, I think.
Yeah.
It's pretty high. But they're short-term loans, right?
Usually 3 months, right? It's to bridge you from now until you get your shred claim because it's worth that sort of sacrifice to bridge you through.
What have your experiences been with investors, ones who want to come in and fund for a piece of the company? Have you done that?
Yes. When Skunkworks first got started, we raised about $300,000 sort of in working capital. And we worked with someone that we knew from a previous startup, from a biotech startup that we were in. And it was good. It was interesting. Every investor is different. Some just are happy. It's like, let me know. Here's my money. Let me know when I get it back. See you never. And then there's others where they really want to be involved and they want updates. They want to talk to you on the monthly. They want to know what's the plan. How would you be like? So the involvement can really range. And so I would encourage people to try to get a feel for, like, know who are the people that are investing and really know.
Can you contract that as part of your contract of how much they have a right to ask? Like, would that be normal, or?
I kind of put it up to like sort of investor relations. I do it a little bit differently now. So, and in fact, sort of when Peggy and I with our company, we said, okay, like if you bring in A, B, and C person, you're responsible for A, B, and C. So you deal with them. And I'm doing this now with my next startup that I'm working on now. It's like, I kind of don't want the technical guys to have to be answering questions from the investors. I want to keep them focused. And so I'm almost setting up shields, and I'll be one of those shields. But also it's like, I feel it's also good from the investor point of view, because then they're talking to someone that they are familiar with and that they know and they trust, right? So for example, Peggy brings someone in, and then I'll tell, I'm happy to have a coffee with Peggy, whatever, and say, okay, this is what it is, because Peggy trusts me. And then those 3 or 4 people that have invested through Peggy, they talk to Peggy, and Peggy's like, look, I'm hearing it from the horse's mouth. This is what's happening. Now, I could skip Peggy and they could talk directly to me, but I don't know them.
Talking more the kind of the friends and family type investor.
The friends and family.
Yeah.
But even the external investors, like, then it gets like, do they want a board seat? Do you have a board? Does the board meet every quarter? Like, how formal do you want the startup to be?
So Craig, what about that form of investor that comes in and basically almost takes control? Like, they withhold funds that they promised and then try to take your share. Do you remember that incident? I remember it well. I remember early Starbucks conversations over that kind of behavior. What kind of investment was that? Was that a share exchange? Like, did you actually take funds in exchange for?
There was a couple. There was one where it was a line of credit, but it was also for equity as well.
Right. That's the one I'm thinking of.
But what we did is, for that particular company, that was structured in a way where there was voting and non-voting shares. And so we were always upfront saying, like, we will control the voting shares, but we're selling the non-voting shares. Right. I mean, it's all in the structure of the deal, right? So you can't pay the money back. They take more shares, and then it's just because it's all about control. And what you want to be careful of is, you don't want to see control until you're ready. And when I say ready, like, okay, I'm ready. I can sell. I'll sell my idea. I've done the work. Here we go. I'll sell it. I'll see you. I'm on to the next one.
Right.
Because it's a different skill set too, right?
So there was a time in Vancouver, I recall hearing this story often, that investors had come in to many companies like this that were in need of cash, were offering a similar arrangement with lines of credit, where in the middle of the development, before the IP was complete, they were withdrawing the line of credit, saying, no, you're not moving fast enough. You're not meeting the conditions of our agreement. So your default is we get the IP. Do you remember hearing those stories?
And IP, depending on what you're doing, like in terms of, especially in the video game companies, IP is everything. The only way I'm giving up IP is if you're buying it outright.
Okay, let's have our accountant explain IP.
My understanding of IP, like, the term is intellectual property. And so this is intangible, knowledge-based asset that they come out of somebody's brain. So, but people lay claim to them. So do you have some words to add to that?
Hold on to your IP, especially if you're in the video game space or art space or even the software space. Hold on to your IP.
And so holding on to your IP also includes your employees that help develop it. Have agreements with those employees to make sure that the IP that they develop while working for you is owned by the company and they have no right to exploit it. That's really, really important.
And that's when you get into employees. So the next step is, we can continue talking about raising money, or we could say, after you've raised your money, then you need to hire employees. So I was kind of saving that.
Jump the queue.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So I would say, if you're starting out, look for grants. There's a lot of opportunities. IRAP helped us out. CMF helped us out on the video game side. Creative BC, for my Fairview Games, we basically got kickstarted. We were able to bootstrap ourselves with a Creative BC grant. Creative BC is awesome. I can't say enough good things about them. They're really great. And so, we kickstarted, use your grant money to get your minimal viable product, your MVP, your demo. You don't go from 0 to 100. It's like in steps. It's like, get a little bit of money, reinvest that money to get your product to here, and then take that product. Okay, now you've got a demoable product. Okay, now you can go and show, maybe you can go to the venture capitalists, or you can go to bigger investors and go, okay, now instead of 50K or 100K, we're looking for $1 million. And this is what we did with 50K. Look at all this cool thing. And these are all the cool things we want to do with the $1 million. And this is when we want to do it. So you're building that story. Investors always like the story.
Well, I think it all comes to the people, right? Like, investors are investing in you.
You're investing in you. And you have to be able to tell the story, right? You have to be able to communicate. Here's the idea. This is what our vision, right? This is what it is now, but this is what it could be. We have X amount of money.
Right. That's interesting. So now you've got a minimum viable product, your MVP.
So now you have a minimum viable product that basically probably you and your fellow co-founders built. It's probably 1 or 2 or 3. I also recommend never do it alone because it's really tough.
What's the one thing you said to me the other day that you learned that you employ all the time now? You said, I'll never forget.
Philosophical alignment.
Yes. It's a great term. And what
I
exactly?
stole that from you. That's
You
yours.
steal that from me.
That's yours. I use that all the time. But I usually say, in the words of Peggy, philosophical alignment.
Yeah. And why? Why? Why is that so important?
Because if you're not philosophically aligned, the person you're in business with, they may have different motives or different end goals than yours.
Rita would love it if she were here today because you said end goals and you're talking about the end, and she always loves it when people know where they're going and have a destination. And you're saying not just my destination, but anyone in this business with me, we have to be aligned philosophically that we're all headed to that same direction.
Because you may want to sell and I don't. So as co-founders, it's like, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I'd be like, I'm never going to sell. This is our baby. So that's founder syndrome. I don't know if you guys have talked about that.
No, but that's an interesting term.
A founder's syndrome is basically the founder never wants to sell because they feel like it's their baby.
They're in love. They're in love with it.
They're in love with it. My opinion, and this is what I always ask potential partners or co-founders. It's like, what's your price? What are you willing to sell for? Because there's always a time where if it's people may want to buy it. So my opinion is I never have founder syndrome. If you want it, it's the right price, no problem. Because I got about 10 million other ideas. I'll just go do it again, rinse and repeat.
That's your veteran attitude.
Yeah, you might just have the one really good idea. And I get that. Like not every idea is going to be a winner. Mm-hmm. So can't be afraid to fail.
Right. That's for sure. Okay. So we're up to alignment with the partners and knowing your end goal.
So again, talk to your original lawyer and go, I need employment contracts. And they will either sub that out to an employment lawyer or you hire an employment lawyer on hand as well. There's some very good employment lawyers in town that work for both and they employer and employee. But definitely as the employer, you need to be able to have a good relationship with your employment lawyer because they're the ones that are going to be drafting up the contracts and they'll be asking you questions like, oh, okay, what do we do for shares and IP and things like that? And, and the employment contract that's where you put everything in.
Okay. So when you talk about putting everything in, you're talking about putting compensation in, you're talking about potential profit sharing or earning shares or sick days and covering that most important part, which is the ownership of the IP. All right. And what about compete? Do you ever put anything in there about not being able to compete?
I think those are really, really hard to enforce.
Yeah, they are.
And typically like on the game side, I always encourage people if they can find another opportunity or a different opportunity or a better opportunity, I'm like, all the best. How can I help? But I know not everyone's like that. And I try to look from the point of view of the employer to make sure that they feel comfortable and they're happy and productive. I think that usually on the game side, the only thing I would say is like, there's not real direct competition with games. Everyone sort of supports each other. It's one of the reasons why I really love the community so much. But it's more like, well, you can't steal what we're working on here and do like a copycat.
The storyline or the method or whatever.
But if you go work on another game, it's like, okay, well, sure. The employment lawyer is good because they will walk you through. I mean, they'll have their template and then they'll ask you and through the conversations with you, they get that, through. So the employment agreements can, develop over time going, this is not quite right. Or you just tweak it.
So it sounds like you're really, really strong on the structure side, Craig. You start with the lawyer and the accountant and get the corporation set up all correctly and then go to the point of the employment agreements. Then what?
Yeah, because the thing with employees like to get paid every 2 weeks. So I know it's shocking. So you have to make sure you got money in the bank. Our rule of thumb was always we would want to have a year of money for that person in the bank before we hire them.
Wow. Okay.
So
That
we could say, look,
safety.
we know you're good for a year. We'll do our best, but we can't promise anything after a year.
So did you make 1-year terms on your employment agreements then?
Yeah, we do 1-year terms.
Okay. So
Do you feel that's specific to the gaming industry, mostly because you're developing something, right?
Well, it's interesting. So that was on the software side. For Fairview right now, we're all independent contractors because we're self-funding it. We didn't take publisher money. We didn't take VC money. If we did, then I would have flipped us all to be employees, including myself. But because we're self-funding it, we're all contractors and we're all on, I think, doing 6-month contracts.
The reason I asked that question is I run an accounting firm, and I can tell you I do not have a year's worth of salary in the bank for all my employees. However, my revenue model is a little bit more predictable than yours, I would.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's why I'm saying don't hire any employees until you have money in the bank, because it gets really stressful, like really stressful when payroll's coming up. And payroll, if you guys remember, payroll wants their money 3 or 4 days before the 15th and the 30th. Because they like to have it set up. That's how they make their money. They just sit on your money, make interest on those 3 or 4 days, and then they disperse it. So that's what I'm saying. You think, oh, I'm running around trying to get money for the 15th. No. You need to have that money in the account before they pull it out by like the 10th or the 11th. So it's extremely stressful. And then it's really difficult to say, hey, we're close, but payday is going to be a couple days late.
how does that work with you?
To me, that means that you're using a payroll processing provider.
Yes.
Which to me is also a very good point, because I have to tell you, people that do their own payroll usually butcher it.
Oh, I would never do my own payroll.
There is a lot to know.
No.
People think it's simple, but it's deceptive.
No, we always use the service just because of the taxes, because you've got the corporate taxes that come off of that and the employee taxes. Like, I would never in a million years think I'd want to run my own payroll.
It's a wise choice. But there's always the do-it-yourselfer out there that thinks, and inevitably they run into trouble.
And it's not that the payroll service is expensive. It's really not.
Oh.
I think the last time I did it was maybe $10 an employee or something a month kind of thing. Like, it was quite reasonable. I forget now. Okay, everyone's a contractor and everyone's an independent contractor. And that way it just makes it cleaner. So you can go and then.
But we need to talk about that.
It comes with its own set of advice.
Yeah, I agree. The payroll company, if you have employees, great idea. But on the independent contractor side, you have to watch the P's and Q's of that, right? Candice, like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
Candice, just quickly, can we go over that?
Talked about that before?
No, we haven't. And that's why I think, Candice, maybe you can just mention the criteria, right? You have to have other income.
It's one of those things where you assess against a list of things. And if you primarily fall on the employee side, then you're probably better just to treat the person as an employee and pay them as an employee. Right. And if you fall more on the subcontractor side, then you're probably free to go that route. It's mostly about control.
Where you work, who provides you tools, who tells you what your hours are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, tools, risk of loss, control is basically the biggest thing.
Okay, that's worth going over, because you can't just be a contractor versus employee on personal choice. You have to meet the conditions.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So the employees, I'm saying we talked about the employees, and then what would be next? Okay, so let's say you're a year in, and now
Probably have to build something.
hopefully you're building all along. Now, the other thing I would say is once you have employees, it's good to have some sort of time tracking software, because it will make your life a lot easier when it comes to shreds time.
Everything, right? Shred. I love it. You saying this on the air, because if everybody tracked their time properly, it would really be helpful.
We actually ended up building our own, because we're a software company. We ended up building our own in-house, to which I still use. And I just have all the guys fill out their timesheets. And then we have it we break down depending on what client you're working for and even which project for which client. And we have that granular level. Mm-hmm. Just the time tracking and like, okay, I spent 2 hours and a quick description. So when it comes times to shreds, you run the report of all the people. Here's all of our time. I would literally hard copy out, print everything out, have it ready on a binder, waiting for the panic for the call I hope I wouldn't get from Peggy saying, we've been audited.
I don't think we
No, we never got audited. Is you know why? I feel it's because I over prepared. I was like, it's like, because I didn't want to be rushed. So it's like, I'm going to assume we're getting audited. I'm going to print everything out. I'll get everything organized, be ready. So in case we do, I can literally hand you the binder and go, here's the breakdown of the projects. Here are all the people. Here's their time. Here's their descriptions. And the thing is like, it's a lot easier to do that if you have that software in place and you just have to say, you got to do it. Probably the hardest part is when we were transitioning. So the current employees were like, okay, I was implementing the system. Like, this is what you got to do. People were like grumpy. And I'm like, no, you got to do it. Any new employee is like, this is what you do. And they're like, oh, okay.
That's classic.
Right. So it's like, so implement it.
Yesterday.
Make sure just have that system set up. And I'm sure there's tons of stuff online now. You know, like I said, we wrote ours because at the time there wasn't anything online.
You know what? I have to tell you, probably not as much as you think. So if you have a good one, that might be your future idea. So,
well, sure. It's like, yeah, I call it Skunk Tracks because it tracks our Skunkworks software. So
I love that you've covered basically from here to there. It sounds like if anyone implemented those steps in that order, they'd have a good start. I just wonder if you've ever reached that point of selling or getting out of one of these companies that you form and what's your experience like with that?
Okay, so here's something that not everyone realizes is that people go crazy when there's money on the table. And I sort of saw this when I was an employee at biotech, but I wasn't as close to it. And again, you think you have a sale and you think this is going to be great. Everyone thinks this is good, but not everyone thinks that, to the point where it kills the deal. And it was interesting. I was talking to this one person, I sort of after the fact, and they said, be very careful who you talk to and who you disclose that there's a potential deal on the table. In fact, tell no one that there's a deal on the table until the deal has gone through.
And are you talking about within the company as employees, or are you talking about within the investor group, or who? How are you? Who?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
If you are the founder/co-founder and you're approached to sell your company, I would be extremely quiet about it. And that was one of my mistakes. It's like, I just thought, oh, cool. Again, it comes back to being philosophically aligned. You assume you're all philosophically aligned going, okay, cool. Yeah, it's not a $1 billion deal, but hey, this is great. You know what? We'll sell it for a few million. Everyone gets a return on their investment and everyone goes home happy. Nope.
That was $100 million wish, right?
Mm-hmm. So it's like, just keep quiet. And I remember seeing just people, and then people start arguing about their contributions, right? Well, I contributed more, so I should get more. How come my options are so low? Blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it just goes off that's why up front, are you philosophically aligned? So I always say, what's the number? With Fairview Games, it's easy because it's just Dave and I. We're the two co-founders. So it's real easy. We're real good. We know our number that we're like, yeah, here you go, because we know that we would just go and move on and start the next game company. The new company, the AI company, I have 3 other co-founders, and I told them, I said, the amount of work that we're doing, I can easily see someone coming in and wanting to buy and take it from there. It's like a golf course where the guy that comes in and he's cutting down the trees or shaping the greens or doing all this work. And then someone goes, oh, that's a cool golf course. Well, thanks for doing all the work. I'll take it from there. Mm-hmm. I personally like starting from zero, from scratch, build it up to a certain point. And then once it becomes like a job,
yeah, okay,
it's time to go. I like the problem solving, and like I said, starting from nothing. Like, that's fun. Building it up to a certain point.
All right. Well, you know what, guys? I think it's that point in the podcast where we're going to do a quick fire. So we're going to go around the room and we're going to either add a comment or ask what resonated with you on this topic. I'm going to start with Candice.
I'm going to say thank you, Craig. That was like very detailed. And I appreciate that you do the right things at the right time, because it makes a huge difference at the end, I would say.
You're very welcome.
You avoid all sorts of problems in between. You don't have to try and fix things. You've just done them right to begin with. And it's a breath of fresh air. So,
Well, I'm going to say from my perspective, you are Rita and Candace's dream client because they are always pushing for people to do the right thing at the beginning and thinking about the end. So begin with the end in mind, right? That plan your way in when you plan your way out. All those little isms that we have, most people don't follow them, including myself. But Craig, it sounds like you really nailed that.
Pride.
And I like it when you refer back to being aligned because I think that's really, 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 really important. People are the greatness in companies, but they are also the downfall. So I think
That's always stuck with me.
being,
Like I said, that's a Peggyism.
being philosophically aligned is so important. And I really love that you put a number on it because sometimes to say, oh yeah, I want to sell them aligned. Well, that's very vague. But I like that you even specifically go to the extent of saying, what's your number? Because they may want to sell at 100 million and you may want to sell at 3 million. So let's get a number that puts us in the same place so that when that time comes, we get that offer, we know what the deal is.
Yeah, because then we can easily say, that's too low. Like, we've had publishers come to on the game side, going, oh, we really wanted us the game. And we're like, okay, well, are we even in the same ballpark? We're like, what's your number? And they're not even close. It's not waste our time here. I'm happy to talk to them and meet them and jump on a call. But I mean, it's just like not even close. Like it's like order of magnitude close because they're just, they're like, oh, well, what can we get away with?
Exactly. So one last closing thought, Kurt.
It's not for the faint of heart,
right?
Doing startups. Honestly, it helps to have a partner like your spouse or a partner that has the steady job. It's good to have where they're not the risk taker and you are the risk taker. Would agree with you on that. It is nice because in case everything goes off the rails, you still have that.
Mortgage gets paid.
Is there.
Yeah.
The mortgage still gets paid. Your rent still gets paid because it is not for the faint of heart. And exercise to help. Exercise.
Yeah. Okay, Candace.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. We appreciate all your words of wisdom. There's lots of good nuggets in there for our listeners today. And for the listeners, we hope that there was something in there that helps you or maybe somebody that you know and to give them some serenity now.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.